5 years ago, the world changed, and it was captured by monsters, the number of which seemed endless. They were fiercely hostile to everyone they encountered. A man in a mysterious robe and cloak appeared before them. Dressed in armor with dragon spikes, ashen hair peeks out from under his clothing, hiding his hostility. He seemed to exude not only coldness, but also an unusual aura. The monsters multiplied before his eyes, but the stranger did not seem to be afraid. Without retreating an inch, he continued to confront the huge horde. The power that the monsters possessed came from the tower. Watching him, one could notice waves of energy surrounding him, like a protective field. This tower was the source of life for many terrifying creatures. The fearless man turned out to be a necromancer named Cha Jinhyuk. Upon closer examination of his face, one could discern not only the calmness with which he looked at the crowd, but also the presence of corresponding scars. The creatures guarding the tower were incarnations of both gods and demons. Their appearance was reminiscent of Greek mythology, religion, or death itself. The tower consisted of 999 floors, each filled with challenges for all who dared to enter. There was also a pleasant aspect to the dangers lurking inside the tower. Reaching the top promised a reward. All wishes would be fulfilled. Overcome challenges and you will be rewarded. The governments of many countries tried their best to curb people's curiosity and prevent the danger posed by the tower by transferring military equipment to its borders. However, all attempts were in vain. The tower seemed to be defending itself. All technology was destroyed, as if the tower was a living organism that refused to allow others to make decisions on behalf of humanity. Since no one could stop people in their quest to reach the secret of the tower, humanity continued its attempts to reach the top and by then had already made some progress. Cha Jin-hyuk was the one who intended to clear the 600th floor of the tower first. Suddenly, as the line of collision of the approaching battle drew closer, the necromancer saw a beam passing through his entire field of vision. In an instant, it illuminated the entire horizon with its red glow. A powerful explosion engulfed the entire field and rose into the air. At this moment, it was impossible to see anything except a bright flame mixed with smoke, against which the silhouettes of the tower blurred. A few moments later, Jin-hyuk's calm was replaced by intense anger at what he saw. Not wanting to hide his disapproval, his voice was heard, addressed to specific individuals. A crowd of people stood opposite the necromancer, preoccupied with what to expect from him. The one who stood at the front and led the crowd had short blonde hair. They all looked at him intently. The rising smoke lifted the clouds, causing his cloak to flutter in the wind. Until this moment, countless people had tried to pass the tests, but among the many people, 9 people stood out from the rest. Possessing extraordinary strength, their abilities were unmatched and they were of the highest level. Cha Jin-hyuk, being one of the title holders, was nicknamed Dark Star or Death Star. He had no swordsmanship talent and was not anything special. However, he managed to surpass the 9-star individuals, and thus received the title of the strongest among them. Using his necromantic abilities, Jin-hyuk summoned hundreds of warriors ready to side with him. A special seal hung over the battlefield, and their animated bodies extended their hand to swear an oath of loyalty to their master. The skeletons, once flesh and blood, stood in the same armor they had once worn in battle. Some of them still had weapons in their remains, the same weapons that had killed them. Surrounded by his loyal subjects, Cha Jin-hyuk seemed invincible. Behind him stood a special skeleton, the width of which was many times greater than the shoulders of its owner. It was like a shield standing behind him. And although his eyes were hidden in the darkness, it seemed as if they were burning with fire, and his face radiated confidence. The necromancer was looking forward to the battle, wanting to demonstrate his abilities more than anyone else. An evil mockery lit up his face. It was an amazing feeling. The skeletons rushed into battle, driven by an invisible force that personified death itself. With swords dressed in the garb of crusaders or medieval crossbowmen, the summoned fighters rushed towards the enemies of their commander. Cha Jin-hyuk was opposed by the paladin Cain Pelin, who considered him a traitor to humanity, and considered it his duty to destroy the necromancer. In his hands he held a book decorated with images of crosses, and with the help of one of the spells contained in it, he turned their battle into a true embodiment of the struggle between darkness and light. The conflict brought together many of the paladin's warriors and massive creatures summoned by the Necromancer. Among them was a beast-like monster, mutated in size, ready to trample or impale anyone with its horns. The sword's movements, reminiscent of sparks, quickly cut through the air, cutting enemies in half. Turning to the other 9-star individuals, the paladin turned their power against Jinhyuk. Their appearance was accompanied by bright rays of energy. Their main weapon was magic, with which they summoned seals. The explosions from their strikes obscured everything around them, accompanied by the sounds of menacing thunder and lightning, personifying the wrath of this powerful alliance. Many of the Necromancer's warriors could no longer continue the battle, falling powerless before him, remaining faithful to him until the very end, even in their second life, which he gave them. Numerous swordsmen rushed towards Jinhyuk, eager to deliver the finishing blow. These first-class weapon-wielding assassins followed the paladin into this battle, well-versed in their craft. Even for such an experienced magician as Jinhyuk, they posed a threat. His face expressed not so much despair as madness and a grin. Withstanding the power of multiple 9-star personalities at the same time was beyond his control. Jinhyuk fell down at great speed, pierced by a spear and arrows protruding from his body. Stretching his arms up, it seemed like all he wanted was to be saved. Moments later, Jinhyuk passed out and was coughing up blood. This was his end. However, he did not betray humanity. The sun illuminating the columns of the tower, and its sparkling view at sunset, shrouded in a pink haze, hinted at the completion of something. The secret left with the Necromancer, but the secret hidden inside the tower remained a secret. The buzzing of mosquitoes, piles of unwashed dishes stacked one on top of the other. The atmosphere of ordinary everyday days and the life of an ordinary person. Under the blanket, someone was snoring loudly, sleeping peacefully in his warm bed to the tune of insects circling around the room. Suddenly the blanket began to tremble, and the lump inside it began to stir, muttering snatches of phrases to itself. A young man suddenly jumped out from under the blanket. Clearly shaken by something, he shook himself off the bed, screaming and expressing horror, as if after a nightmare. Waking up in his own bed, he was disoriented for a few seconds, not understanding what had happened, but then, he realized that he had achieved something, and a certain ability appeared. His face expressed great pleasure. His eyes sparkled brighter than before. The ability that fascinated him was the transmigration of souls, which meant, after death he managed to transfer his soul into a new body and gain a new life. The body suited him perfectly, bearing similarities to the one he had before. It was the body of an ordinary guy from South Korea, who had lived an ordinary life until that moment. However, the thought of the 9-star people continued to plague his mind, and in a fit of anger, he clenched his fist in frustration. Cha Jinhyuk, reborn in a new body, decided that it was time to reclaim what belonged to him and conquer the 600th floor of the tower. All that his appearance conveyed was aggression, and the thought of betrayal haunted him incessantly. While going back to his past memories, Jinhyuk was confronted with a scene where he once choked on his own blood. Pierced by many swords, he was on his knees and could not find an explanation for what was happening. Why did it happen this way? Who was responsible? Why was he betrayed? Before him stood the same Cain Pelin, the paladin who later accused him of treason, and next to him was his sister Carmen, the saint. Behind them stood a nameless crowd, watching it all, and a massive sacred seal adorned the ceiling. Carmen Pelin felt her superiority over the Necromancer, and demonstrated it in every way. Although she recognized his strength, she still considered Jinhyuk insignificant compared to her and her brother's strength. The Necromancer, known as a man who could single-handedly replace an entire army, was now on his knees and breathing raggedly, enduring the humiliation directed at him. Cain continued to watch him, looking down. His attire exuded nobility, his posture gave him confidence, and a white shawl hung from his shoulders. Their styles were harmoniously combined with Carmen. But nothing highlighted him more than his arrogance towards others. An arrogance that caused Cain to view people stronger than himself as a threat that must be eliminated. The paladin's gaze took on an ominous and insane look. Feeling triumphant at the moment when his enemy was practically defeated, he believed that this would be the end of it all. Jinhyuk felt indignant at what he saw next to the paladin. Besides the deliberate betrayal against him, it was a stunning fact for him to see a familiar face on his side. It was Choi Jae-hoon, his friend and comrade, who also possessed exceptional strength. Master of hand-to-hand combat. His hands, bandaged up to the elbows, emphasized his fighting manner, and his tousled hair resembled a wild animal ready to impulsively enter into a fight. Jin-hyuk felt sad that his friend couldn't help him. They decided not to inform Jae-hoon about the planned betrayal so that he would not interfere. They all continued to watch the Necromancer bleed to death. Gradually, Jin-hyuk began to lose his vision and his attention became blurred. His violet eyes with beautifully drawn lines, hidden behind his hair, no longer had the same clarity and coordination. But on the verge of life and death, Jin-hyuk activated one of his abilities, emitting a bright purple glow from his hand. This was his chance to change the course of events. Not relying on fate and not wanting to accept its outcome, he took control of it. He placed this hand on his heart, distributing the remaining energy throughout his body, filling it, reviving the fading organism. At that moment, many emotions intertwined within him. In the last moments of his life, disgusting images of a paladin and a priestess appeared before him, mocking him. The Necromancer gradually lost consciousness. Closing my eyes, the bright light gradually gave way to darkness. Jin-hyuk wasn't ready to give up so easily. Even if not in this body and not right now, he would find a way to return through the souls of those who betrayed him. He collapsed lifelessly as dust rose around him, covering his body. It seemed that everything was over, and the threat seen in the Necromancer had been eliminated. But this was not the case. Thinking about this event, as if transported back to that day, Jin-hyuk felt even more indignant. Veins appeared on his face and neck, indicating intense physical stress. Anger washed over him, eclipsing all other emotions, and the realization that he could no longer summon creatures with the same ease filled him with rage. Suddenly the phone, lying a couple of meters from the guy, rang, and a sweet voice called him to wake up. For a few minutes, Jin-hyuk managed to forget that he was no longer the powerful Necromancer he once knew, but just an ordinary guy from Korea, still lying under a warm blanket. Surprised by this unfamiliar object that had never bothered him before, Jin-hyuk turned his attention to the call and reached for the phone, picking it up. It was a regular smartphone with a minimalist design, rounded edges and white color. There were several cameras and absolutely nothing unnecessary to distract attention. Jin-hyuk had an idea of what it was, but had never owned one himself. So owning such a device gave him a pleasant feeling, like a child. But then Jin-hyuk was horrified when he noticed the date displayed on the phone's home screen because, being out of touch with reality, he could never have expected it. The year was 2023, which could only mean one thing: 10 years have passed since Jin-hyuk decided to reincarnate into another body. The screen featured the same minimalist aesthetic, expressed through a cosmic backdrop. It seemed that the Necromancer did not fully understand how this ability worked. He was shocked by this realization. A full 10 years passed before his essence was unable to find a suitable body to give him life again. But Jin-hyuk's worries about the passage of time were suddenly replaced by thoughts about what happened to his skills that once brought him fame. Would he be able to use them again, or was it all in vain? One of the mosquitoes, continuing to remind him of its existence, was a great way to test this. He flew higher towards the ceiling, and Jin-hyuk pretended not to notice. With a quick movement, he clapped his hands, and the impact echoed throughout the room. Surprisingly, Jin-hyuk had a very quick reaction despite not fully adapting after his return. The skills he had acquired in the past could not remain idle. Standing menacingly on the bed, Jin-hyuk watched the creature he had just killed a second ago, now intending to give it a second wind. Even though he was just a mosquito, a tiny creature that no one mourned, Jin-hyuk's previous abilities allowed him to resurrect anyone, turning them to his side. He exhaled with relief, as if anxiously wondering whether he would be able to achieve the desired result, feeling the excitement of the upcoming action. He didn't want to believe that anything significant had changed inside him over the past 10 years. The young man, who could easily have lived a carefree life, increasingly resembled in his appearance the most powerful Necromancer. His look, behavior and manner of speaking revealed the strength he felt within himself. He looked at the mosquito as something that he had to control, as something that had to serve him. Jin-hyuk spoke a sacred phrase to the insect, a command that it had to obey. It was just one word, awake. Jin-hyuk continued to stand on the bed and watch, but nothing happened. Absolutely nothing has changed in the surrounding space. He could not influence anything, and this complete silence became unbearable for him. Unable to contain his anger, Jin-hyuk began to scream loudly, expressing his disappointment at what he saw. The lack of results made him extremely angry, as if someone was trying to insult or doubt his abilities. He continued to scream, but everything remained the same. Trying to find an explanation for this failure, the Necromancer came up with the idea that perhaps the body he found himself in was unable to generate the mana to use the abilities he possessed. This angered him even more, but then, remembering something, he decided to look out the window and again saw something familiar. In fact, something all too familiar from his past. Pulling back the curtains, he could clearly see the object of his attention. Under the blue sky stood the same colossal tower, countless kilometers long and consisting of 999 floors. Its height was so enormous that the top was covered with clouds, and it was impossible to see it. Vague thoughts flooded Jin-hyuk's mind, and this time he became worried about whether anyone had reached the top of the tower in these 10 years. He quickly grabbed his smartphone to read the news, turning his full attention to the screen. Busily scrolling through his news feed, he quickly skimmed through the headlines, running his fingers across the screen, barely noticing what he was reading, and then Jin-hyuk saw the news about the tower. And the man who was once his friend. Previously, Kyohun, despite being a star, did not participate in cleaning floors, but the headline said otherwise. Now he was the one who had reached the 800th floor, which meant that in 10 years people had managed to scale 200 floors. However, Jin-hyuk considered this shamefully small. Jin-hyuk felt challenged by this news. His eyes flashed again, and his unrelenting anger fueled his desire to surpass those who had betrayed him. For him, this was a chance to get back what he had lost. Grabbing the hoodie, he decided he couldn't hesitate any longer. It's time to act. His anger could be felt in the tension of his wrist, and his movements were sharp. Putting on a sweatshirt and pulling the sleeve over his arm, Jin-hyuk walked outside to make his way to the tower. He believed that training outside his walls would be pointless, and all he had to do was get there as quickly as possible. His new body looked more like a beginner who had just started training than a master with many years of experience. However, Jin-hyuk believed that the accumulated knowledge and skills would help him regain his previous abilities. Memories of battles flashed through his mind, where summoned creatures filled the surrounding space, and he, as the leader of the army, led them. Together and individually, each reminded him of his strength and unprecedented abilities. Jin-hyuk's gaze expressed an insatiable lust for murder. He believed that if he just showed patience, he could unleash all his wrath on his tormentors, see the matter through, and reach the 9-star level. The revenge was personal and concerned only himself, and the life he lost because of them. The tower stood right in the middle of the city. From above it looked even more intimidating and clearly stood out among the many buildings in the surrounding area. It would be impossible to ignore this. Despite the years since its introduction, it still attracted significant public attention. Jin-hyuk walked up to the tower, surrounded by a crowd of ordinary people showing curiosity. Perhaps they also dreamed of entering there to face trials, but their fear turned out to be stronger and perhaps saved them from certain death. Jin-hyuk overheard a conversation between two young men, each trying to appear braver than the other. One expressed a desire to get rich by overcoming the trials, while the other believed that it would end in tears for him, even failing to conquer the first floor. All this did not interest Jin-hyuk, and not paying attention to them, he continued to move forward, driven by his own thoughts. His gaze became more focused and hard. The Necromancer in the body of a young man had no illusions about this place. He had no intention of seeking anyone's approval or recognition, nor did he seek wealth or fame. The only thing he wanted was retribution. The tower was a mysterious and menacing place. It absorbed the hopes of others, lost destinies, stories of courage. And if someone could write down what they saw here in a book, it would not leave anyone indifferent. Inside, a massive spiral staircase rose up, and the portal was illuminated by blue flames next to tall columns. Abandoned rooms with sarcophagi making eerie sounds, bird cages smashed on the floor, and chests possibly still filled with gold. The skeletons buried within them, as if still powered by some kind of magic and shrouded in a faint mist, sent shivers down the spine, and the mere sight of them brought a chill to the bones. A furious fire engulfed a vast expanse of the forest, and the rising smoke, choking, required only one action: flight. There was simply no time to think when there was only one driving goal: survival. Someone listened to their intuition and now took steps to quickly avoid the impending danger. Bare feet and open-toed sandals served as a reminder that a threat could strike unexpectedly. The girl, looking like a succubus or with devil horns and red tear-stained eyes, ran further and further from the fire. Panic took over her worried face against the backdrop of trees engulfed in bright red and yellow flames. While some were grieving at the same time, others continued to live carefree. Just like here, someone was happily rubbing their hands at their newfound advantage and enthusiastically tossing their coins. An elegantly dressed man sat at a table decorated with stacks of coins and stood next to a scale, catching a coin in the air. His face remained hidden, as did his motives, but his wealth allowed him to control lives just like a swordsman. A stranger came to him and demanded a sum of money in the name of Cha Jin-hyuk. In a narrow alley of the night courtyard passed a white creature similar to a fox, a symbol of a kitsune, a mythical creature known for its enormous knowledge, long life and magical abilities. It was believed that such a creature could live for hundreds of years. A demon-like man with huge upward-pointing horns, straight and with golden hollows to match his black hair, glistening in the sun, walked along a wide street. He wandered along the street with an air of self-confidence, believing that he should be known. He wore a massive fur-trimmed cloak over a red and black Chinese-style suit, with his arms and neck wrapped. People looked at him with concern. This man had a noble, serene face. His demonic nature consumed him in contemplation, as if nothing around him was as important as his own thoughts. The whole world could wait. The entrance to the tower was finally opened, and a massive blue portal appeared in front of the crowd, which included Jin-hyuk. People were excited about the possibilities ahead. If only they knew what awaited them. People rushed to the portal to enter the tower as quickly as possible. Jin-hyuk remained calm as he stood in the middle of the crowd. The moment Jin-hyuk had been waiting for 10 years had finally arrived, and his anger turned to smugness. Entering the tower was the first step towards his enemies. This was the beginning of his revenge. A huge gate at least 4 meters high opened in front of Jin-hyuk, and the portal made a spherical movement, as if driven by some kind of mechanism. He quickly entered with the others. The gates immediately slammed shut, leaving no other way out. Above the gate hung blue lanterns, reminiscent of the attributes of a dungeon and casting ominous shadows. The atmosphere itself was eerie, with the lighting and ancient brick walls. The door closed with a loud noise, and the metal inserts on the front of it added weight and force to the impact. It was no longer possible to open it from the inside. The magical power of the tower controlled its processes from the inside, like a living organism. Jin-hyuk found himself in a huge hall, and the tower greeted him. Each of the climbers was initially separated from each other, unable to help, so the Necromancer had to face this test alone. The hall was illuminated with a powerful blue glow, and under his feet was a seal that seemed to activate upon any contact. With some thought, Jin-hyuk remembered the time when he was here for the first time. At least 15 years had passed since then, and his mind was full of memories of that time. He surveyed the path that awaited him. Jin-hyuk stood in the introductory arena, and the sign at the top start meant the beginning for him in every sense. The platform he had to walk on went far into the depths of the tower, and it was impossible to see it in its entirety. Jin-hyuk himself was located in its rounded part, providing more space. There was an unknown abyss right below him, and being too careless could result in him falling to his death, not to mention further problems. The thought of the tests made the Necromancer sigh heavily. The situation itself irritated him, and the role of a newcomer, which meant that he would have to go through everything all over again, angered him even more. The passage of the paths along the corridor will take several days in total. To reach the end, the test subject had to run to survive and reach the finish line. The journey was not easy, but those who made it to the 10th floor claimed that by that point it all seemed like a fun obstacle. The walls had square indentations, as if designed by someone who loved mathematics and calculations, and the color, like almost everything in the tower, was blue. Jin-hyuk stood in front of the floating holographic display and carefully read the description of the trial. The goal was to get through all the traps set by the tower, and one of the benefits of the initial stage was that if a person took too much damage, their injuries would be nullified and they would return to the starting point they came from. After reading the tower's message, Jin-hyuk decided to find out one more thing before starting the test. By entering the building, climbers could access data reflecting their personal qualities, such as strength, intelligence, endurance, and the like. These values were critical to progression through the floors. Much like a game in which you have characteristics that can be developed, the tower functioned as a separate virtual simulation with its own laws of interaction. It was not much different from the game. What would kill a person in real life, here will only bring pain and the opportunity for a second chance to try again. The tower allowed climbers to familiarize themselves with their personal parameters, and Jin-hyuk, already familiar with its system, asked to view this data. The status window displayed all the characteristics of his newly acquired body. All indicators were at one point in the experiment, and could develop during the tests depending on the actions of the subject. Overall, for the first level everything was as expected, but there were a few things that genuinely puzzled Jin-hyuk. His physical type was based on mana, which meant that Jin-hyuk's body would have an easier time generating energy for the death magic he planned to master once again. This characteristic seemed to be an advantage for the Necromancer. However, Jin-hyuk also noticed a section in the window called Personality Traits. And one of his hallmarks was gluttony. These seemingly incompatible features were features of a body that had become his own. This made him realize that his personal qualities were not transferred to the new body during the soul transfer, which upset him. However, outwardly he remained restrained, not showing unnecessary emotions. Before starting the tests, the Necromancer decided to stretch his muscles, raising his arms high to stretch his back. Although he now looked like a young boy, his combat experience showed that he was far from 20 years old mentally. Fueled by the anticipation of the challenge, and showing a smug look on his face, Jin-hyuk was eager to bet on it the highest and succeed. Everything was at stake. The anticipation of power consumed him. Suddenly, Jin-hyuk lifted himself off the ground and ran, starting the test. The path was filled with traps that tested the player's strength and ability to persevere in attempting to complete the challenge. He quickly gained enormous speed, which could quickly tire him out. Waves of wind surrounded his entire body, and he could not see anything except his target. The system notified him that he was leaving the starting point. From a dark corridor surrounded by walls with geometric abstractions, Jin-hyuk saw red rays shining directly at him from afar. He realized that the trap had already been activated. Swinging his arms as he ran, he tried to figure out what to do next. The beam, resembling an arrow, passed him by just a few centimeters. As if he knew its trajectory in advance, he dodged it effortlessly, and a red glow flashed before his eyes like a ray of sunshine. Jin-hyuk already knew that the arrow only shoots at him when he sees it. The previously acquired knowledge became an advantage for him, and the Necromancer once again felt his superiority over the usual system. Then Jin-hyuk changed his tactics and turned his back to the arrows so as not to see them. They continued to appear on the horizon, but no longer seemed as dangerous as expected. But even Jin-hyuk couldn't expect such a number. Excitement flashed in his eyes, and it made him feel a sense of panic. The arrows fly at him with the sole purpose of hitting him. Speeding up again, the young man almost became a target just a couple of meters away. His quick reaction to danger proved to be his salvation, and he ran like the wind. Something changed in the system of coordinating the movement of the arrow, and suddenly, while catching up with Jin-hyuk, he suddenly felt caught off guard, without the ability to react in time. Jin-hyuk felt a sharp pain that disrupted his usual rhythm. The beam seemed to pierce him rapidly, and the Necromancer almost stumbled from the disorientation of his body. However, Jin-hyuk was not going to give up. Despite the failure, he endured the feeling of the arrows piercing his body and continued to run, teeth bared and feeling a surge of anger. The rays flying from a height where the ceiling of the room resembled a black sky became too numerous, filling all the airspace. Hit by dozens of arrows, Jin-hyuk was almost defeated, and their force pushed him back several meters. But Jin-hyuk persisted, like an animal wounded in the forest, determined to survive even after numerous blows and significant physical damage. From a victim who could only moan in pain, Jin-hyuk turned into a force and continued to move forward no matter what. Jin-hyuk felt great pain, but felt it was his duty to keep moving. Sweat streamed down his face, and his breathing began to become labored. Losing coordination and stopping, his body leaned forward along with his face. His muscles couldn't hold him up, and like a chain reaction, the entire plan to reach his destination began to crumble. Leaving a trail of blood behind him, Jin-hyuk collapsed lifelessly. There were arrows sticking out of his body. He walked just a few steps from the starting point. The start sign loomed almost over Jin-hyuk. His beaten body remained motionless, lying a few meters from this sign. Finally reaching the starting point, all his strength was restored. The thought of risking his life or injuries no longer mattered, but the young man still couldn't stand up, unable to move an inch. Trying to regain his composure, Jin-hyuk barely breathed and collected his thoughts. Apparently, a tired body did not become an obstacle for him to continue the tests. It was then that Jin-hyuk began to think about what he could change in his actions to get to the finish line. Surveying the bloody path he left behind, the Necromancer decided that this would be a great way to increase his stamina, as well as help him understand his limits and how long he could endure. As he crawled along the ground, using his blood as support, Jin-hyuk reflected that he had two character traits that helped him become the strongest. One of them was gluttony. This atypical characteristic reflected not so much a penchant for food as a gluttony for other people's energy, which was a valuable quality for a necromancer. Licking his finger, Jin-hyuk activated his powers again. All the blood scattered along the path now rose into the air under the control of the magician. It moved towards him, and he could shape it or give it the direction he wanted. Surrounded by his own blood, like a protective shield, Jin-hyuk again appeared in the form of a powerful necromancer who felt his power. Unclenching his fingers, he felt the energy of power flowing through them again. Jin-hyuk's stats increased, giving extra points to each of his attributes. The stats now indicated that Jin-hyuk had become less susceptible to pain, blood loss, and other vital signs. The initial attempt to complete the path could now be seen as training, which made him stronger. Then Jin-hyuk realized that this was exactly what he needed to improve his skills. However, thinking that he had enough attributes completed at the base level, he was too confident in himself. The tests continued and the arrows continued to hit him with amazing accuracy. The arrows almost hit his heart, increasing Jin-hyuk's pain, but along with the pain, his anger also grew. His main desire remained to overcome the path. He tried again and again, and each time the arrows overtook him, leaving him powerless halfway. Initially, Jin-hyuk only covered a short distance before starting over. Over time, Jin-hyuk's speed and effort increased. He was quick and unwavering, continuing to move at a brisk pace towards his goal. Statistics also grew rapidly, making it easier to overcome painful sensations. Red bars filled with indicators of Jin-hyuk's sensitivity to various things. Jin-hyuk was completely exhausted and tired. His hair became slightly damp, and his gaze became calmer and more focused. Jin-hyuk repeated his attempts tirelessly, trying to find a way to pass the path. Pierced by arrows, but no longer as inexperienced as when he arrived, Jin-hyuk finally reached the end. He stood right in front of the portal leading to the next stage. Pools of blood could be seen behind him, and the treasured ready sign hung above him. Finally, one of the initial stages, called the learning stage, was completed. Jin-hyuk's body was enveloped in a green glow, indicating the healing process in the tower's internal system. Now he could exhale, embodying the calmness of the completion of the first stage, and it seemed as if he rose slightly above the man who had entered the tower for the first time in 15 years. Jin-hyuk was actually surprised that a whole month had passed since he accepted the challenge. With each attempt, his endurance became stronger, pushing him further along the path. After all, it was only a matter of time before he passed the first level, and after that month, he was finally able to advance to the second level. Some memories of this place alarmed Jin-hyuk, and he noticed a new text window in which the system usually left instructions, warnings, or messages to the player. This time there was a message. This was a message from the inhabitants of this tower, gods and demons who had the opportunity to communicate with the climber, showing interest in his abilities, skills, or anything else. Jinhyuk clearly recognized these demons as someone very familiar to him. Creatures that reminded him of someone caused an ambiguous reaction in the Necromancer, even a certain disgust from a specific memory of them. Jinhyuk was so angry about this that it felt like the flames would follow him. He could not contain his rage, clenching his fists tightly and shouting loudly, cursing everything that existed. The demons, Jinhyuk's old acquaintances, materialized in front of him again, now seeming to loom over him, demonstrating their power. Compared to the background of the Necromancer, the creatures seemed huge and instilled fear. Some had horns and a menacing appearance, while others wielded sharp weapons that reminded Jinhyuk of his past life. The third group resembled dragons, ready to mercilessly incinerate anyone. Even demonic women, whose visual attractiveness was merely a deception designed to lure the victim before striking. Both the gods and demons of this tower carefully watched the applicants, and, if they found someone similar to themselves, they were immediately interested in him. Jinhyuk hated them with all his heart. None of them revealed their true identities, and Jinhyuk believed that their interactions with mortals were just a game to manipulate them for his own purposes or even make them his disciples and obey them. In any case, the Necromancer believed that he had handled the first test skillfully enough to resist their manipulations, and not feel like a failure or a novice. Demons and gods left messages that could contradict each other. Some doubted Jinhyuk, while others praised him in surprise. Suddenly, Jinhyuk saw a message from the demon that particularly caught his attention, and a warning bell rang in his head. A demon showing joy at the sight of an ordinary person couldn't be a coincidence. The demon was nicknamed the Peak of All Evil and took an interest in Jinhyuk's life, having known him in the past and still showing interest in his personality. This demon, also known as Baal, had been watching the young man all this time. From the tone of the message, Jinhyuk immediately understood who it could be, but he was not at all happy about meeting an old acquaintance. In a past life, Baal, or as he was called, the Peak of All Evil, was literally possessed by the personality of a necromancer. Jinhyuk compares it to glue that sticks tightly to you. To Jinhyuk's surprise, it seemed that Baal was able to recognize him even after being reincarnated into a new body. Certain character traits or abilities indicated similarities between them from the past. However, it was Baal who ensured the transmigration of Jinhyuk's soul. This ability, which he received from Baal, ironically once again intertwined their destinies, and Baal felt tempted to once again show excessive interest in the Necromancer, to make him his student. Interest in Jinhyuk continued to manifest itself from different sides, expressed in messages from both demonic and divine entities. The young man silently looked at the screen, hiding his hands in his pockets, experiencing dissonance in the unfolding situation. Their interest also centered on manifestations of Baal and a growing interest in the developing relationship. Jinhyuk was angry with him like he was a child, accusing him of unwanted attention to his person. Baal harbored normal human feelings for Jinhyuk, such as compassion and empathy, and continued to try to gain his attention. Meanwhile, the other demons wondered about the relationship between the two of them. Makak, who showed sympathy for Jinhyuk, and the god of thunder, who wanted personal communication, were among the gods who continued to write messages to the Necromancer, and the number of messages with different reactions and requests to him was increasing. All Jinhyuk wanted was for them to finally shut up and disappear, as they were driving him to extreme irritation. Jinhyuk found in Baal one of the few demons he responded to. Even though he was still rude to him, he gave him the reaction and attention he was seeking. The irony of Baal was that the power he possessed did not take away his childish perception, so he treated Jinhyuk as an equal, as if he were his friend or even admired him. Entering into a somewhat one-sided argument with Baal, Jinhyuk tried to make him understand that he would never choose him out of principle, but he still knew that the demon would not give up trying to contact him and be near him, and Jinhyuk decided that it was time to move forward. Licking the blood from his fingers, he anticipated the continuation, wanting to know what other rewards awaited him in the future, what he would receive for his efforts. Looking back, I see blood stains trailing behind Jinhyuk. The path he had taken had not been the easiest, and he picked it up again as part of the air he breathed, following it. The attributes associated with Jinhyuk's sensitivity to vital signs had now reached their maximum, meaning that he had initially achieved his goals set at the beginning of the initial stage. In terms of blood loss, pain threshold and penetration, he gained greater tolerance and decreased sensitivity. Jinhyuk's new body gradually became stronger. One of the notable aspects of the mana types that Jinhyuk belonged to was that he could generate mana even in places where it seemed impossible, since the training path did not involve its use. This indicated the development of a necromancer. What he had recently struggled to do was now more real and visible. Through the development of his abilities, Jinhyuk discovered his second character trait, indicated in the characteristics, but hidden until this moment. The necromancer was slightly surprised by this, wondering what it could be. A few drops of sweat rolled down his cheek, reflecting some excitement. The newly discovered trait seemed like a joke. 3 question marks that didn't answer Jinhyuk's curiosity. However, there was a catch in its very name, which the necromancer would discover only in the near future, waiting for him on his way. At first, not fully understanding the meaning of this trait, Jinhyuk believed that its essence lay in his body's tendency to constantly seek answers to what deeply concerns him. That was one way to characterize this trait. But it only seemed so to him. An update appeared in the window, and the question marks were replaced with a rather specific name for the trait, which still sounded incomprehensible to a necromancer. Having no idea what exactly this abstract-sounding trait entailed, Jinhyuk decided to read its detailed description. There he found the following explanation. The quality of being an all-rounder meant that no matter what Jinhyuk set his mind to, he succeeded in it. It didn't matter what skills and abilities he previously possessed in any given field, he could implement them all, regardless of whether he had ever possessed them before or not. Jinhyuk was incredibly happy about this news. The newly acquired trait gave him a significant advantage in overcoming future problems. The necromancer suddenly felt that with this quality he could do absolutely anything, and his thirst for power began to be replenished just by the thought of new possibilities. In the past, Jinhyuk faced a being of enormous power to which he lost even after careful preparation. They called him the Lord of All. He had long hair tied into a ponytail, and his weapons were a long sword and a dagger. He wore padded gloves, metal bracers and greaves on his arms, and a sheath positioned directly along his upper body. As Jinhyuk reminisced about his invincible opponent, a message from Baal appeared on the display, showing extreme interest in this new trait of the necromancer. Lost in thought, Jinhyuk, slightly out of touch with reality, was greatly disoriented by Baal's sharp reaction, sensing something was wrong. He almost screamed at the message he had just seen, feeling excited about this newfound ability that he hadn't even unlocked the potential of yet. Still looking at the screen, Jinhyuk looked a little stunned by the text he read. Baal's messages were highlighted in red, making it difficult to confuse them with anyone else. However, once he regained his composure, the necromancer returned to his usual cold and dismissive attitude towards the demon that he had mostly displayed before. For now, he only expressed his desire for Baal to leave. But deep down, Jinhyuk wanted Baal to accompany him, inviting him to follow him if he so chose. Having received a positive answer to his question about whether Baal could really accompany him, the demon decided to move on with Jinhyuk. With a confident and focused look, Jinhyuk was determined to look to the future as he left this place. Collecting his memories bit by bit, the necromancer realized that the next thing awaited him, room of choice and learning. And the system confirmed that the transition to the room was successfully completed. The necromancer already knew what awaited him, and this made him more cold-blooded towards everything he might encounter. Jinhyuk stepped out of the portal and ventured deeper into the room, leaving behind a sphere-like area with a blue-white glow. Without even looking back, he continued moving forward. The room Jinhyuk now found himself in had a variety of weapons associated with different classes. The player had the opportunity to choose the one that he thought suited him best. Having made a choice, mastered it, and made sure that it suited the climber, Jinhyuk needed to break the floor, symbolizing the transition to the first level. The first 2 places that Jinhyuk visited were actually just preparation fields for moving on to the real tests. In the past, After discovering that he had a mana type, Jin-hyuk had no doubts about becoming a mage, which ultimately led him to the path of a necromancer. However, now that he had acquired a new character trait, Jin-hyuk decided to take this opportunity and make a different choice. He took the arrow, tied in the middle, and squeezed it tightly in his hand, testing the new weapon. Jin-hyuk was extremely intrigued by this universal personality trait that he had recently acquired, and he decided to test it by giving the system a voice command to generate targets. Many targets surrounded Jin-hyuk, and he confidently took the bow in his hands, as if it had been a familiar weapon for quite some time. Time seemed to stand still for a moment. Quickly drawing the bowstring, Jin-hyuk mastered the weapon before his eyes, as if even the most talented student could not achieve such mastery under the same conditions. Jin-hyuk fired the arrows so quickly that they flew in groups, hitting 3 targets almost simultaneously. Due to the strong tension, their speed exceeded the speed of the wind. The arrows hit targets with high precision, resembling shining rays that knew exactly where to hit and moved along predetermined coordinates. Jin-hyuk then instructed the system to generate new targets that could attack him. In addition, he requested a significantly larger number of targets. The system immediately responded with a warning, saying that without selecting a specific class, attacking targets could pose a great danger to the player. However, Jin-hyuk was so pleased with his new abilities that the added danger only increased his interest. The materialized targets resembled skeletal figures cut out from anatomy textbooks with muscular structures and capable of movement. Due to their numbers, they can pose a significant threat to Jin-hyuk. Finally, these animated targets decided to launch a coordinated attack, planning to converge on their target from different directions. Retreating slightly and jumping a little, Jin-hyuk dealt with them without much effort. Adjusting the angle of the bowstring, he continued to fire 3 arrows at a time. The arrows continued to hit their targets accurately, and their rapid movement towards Jin-hyuk did not radically change the situation. Targets resembling human figures were hit directly in the head. However, there were others who, due to their numbers, got quite close to Jin-hyuk, quickly approaching him, almost throwing himself on top of him, and reaching for him. It seemed like he was caught off guard, underestimating his abilities on the training field. But then, with a quick blow, their bodies were split in half. Arrows would be completely useless in close combat, and realizing this, Jin-hyuk picked up an alternative weapon available in the room. The sword blade Jin-hyuk found here came in handy at the most unexpected moment. There were small remnants of white flesh on the blade of the sword that was part of the target. There were several deep scratches on the metal, very noticeable scars. The sound of the blade echoed in his ears for a while. Jin-hyuk felt a growing buzz from his training and tried out various weapons, sabers, spears and others he found in the room, wanting to fully test his strength and demanding that the system provide him with the most powerful enemies it had to offer. With the command's careful execution, the level of targets was significantly increased and the system generated much larger targets for Jin-hyuk. One of the targets had a wide shoulder line and could easily cover Jin-hyuk during the fight, allowing the others to strike. Without hesitation, Jin-hyuk decided to immediately attack one of them. His looming shadow, reflecting something heavy in his hands, he flew at full speed towards the target, who seemed to be in shock. Landing from a great height, Jin-hyuk knocked down his target and stabbed his spear right into its head. It could no longer pose a threat to him. Testing new types of weapons, this time the Necromancer picked up 2 paired daggers and crossed his arms, holding them. The feeling of being able to master absolutely everything seemed incredible to Jin-hyuk. The largest target, resembling a monster, was smashed by Jin-hyuk and lay motionless. Meanwhile, 2 smaller targets behind him were hit from behind by him. The 2 thrown daggers precisely pierced their bodies. Suddenly he heard some unusual movement behind him and sounds reminiscent of engines. Targets that resembled satellite dishes with laser beams that had a good aim were quickly approaching Jin-hyuk. The new goals caused a storm of discontent in Jin-hyuk's eyes. Burning with anger, he realized that these targets, unlike others, were long-range, and tried to figure out how to deal with them. In addition to their long-range capabilities, the attacking targets were flying and could attack the Necromancer from the air. With their rays they filled the entire space and caused an explosion. Having barely managed to hide behind the body of a defeated enemy, Jin-hyuk was considering his next step. Confirming Jinhyuk's fears, the system announced that these targets are the most dangerous targets that can be created at this level. But after regaining his composure in just a few seconds, Jinhyuk returned to form, and he was completely confident in himself, retreating to the required distance. Then the Necromancer decided to use an object that resembled a question mark, like a stick or staff. This represented one of his features. By adopting a menacing appearance and waving his staff, Jinhyuk could destroy all of these targets as long as he accumulated enough mana. Distant targets resembling small planes quickly flew towards Jinhyuk, accumulating force in their projectiles, resembling spherical beams in their reflective parts. However, the mana stored in the staff moved much faster and could instantly hit an enemy. Jinhyuk's face was filled with confidence. The Necromancer called this ability Magic Arrow. The power created by the mana erupted from the staff, splitting in multiple directions and hitting hostile targets with great speed. The impact of the arrows caused several explosions, successfully destroying the planes flying towards Jinhyuk. The Necromancer stopped, watching as debris flew in all directions. After such a blow, there was nothing left of them. Jinhyuk felt the power of his newfound strength, allowing him to wield any weapon as if he had been practicing it for many, many years. Unexpectedly, the system announced the discovery of a new achievement without providing any details. Feeling somewhat surprised, Jinhyuk wanted to know more about it. The achievement meant a significant increase in attack power by 50 points. Thus, those who used all types of weapons in the selection room were rewarded. In addition, as a reward, the system provided the opportunity to choose the Jack of all trades class. Having not encountered this before, Jinhyuk found this to be a revelation and slightly puzzled him. But as was typical for him, he began to look for answers to the questions he had. However, there was a catch to this achievement. This class could only be selected now, and this option would not be available in the future. Thus, the system presented Jinhyuk with a serious choice that he had to make. In fact, the system always asked unambiguous questions, and it was impossible to choose something in between. It was always either complete refusal or acceptance. Despite the tempting offer, Jinhyuk could not agree to it, given his main inclination towards necromancy. So, he wondered what he could do about this dilemma facing him. Then Jinhyuk decided that he needed to select this class as a subclass, and reported this to the system. This was the best compromise he could make at the moment, allowing him to maintain his advantages while still displaying his main style of magic. However, the system refused, which greatly disappointed Jinhyuk. He really wanted to know what was preventing him from making the opposite decision. Although the system had a certain level of programming, it also took into account the wishes of the people entering the tower, including Jinhyuk. The catch was that to unlock the subclass you had to reach the 100th floor, which Jinhyuk had forgotten about during his 15-year absence from the early levels of the tower. He couldn't put off choosing a class like he wanted. However, what caught his attention were the achievement points he had earned for his past accomplishments. These points could be used to obtain various bonuses that were part of the tower system. Therefore, Jinhyuk asked the appropriate question to realize the compromise he had found between the established system and his own desires. Although the tower was a system devoid of human emotions, if it could experience them, it would undoubtedly be quite puzzled by Jinhyuk's question. Knowing such a detail was a little strange for someone who was encountering this for the first time. Even the question mark indicated the lack of understanding he encountered in response to this question. Achievement points could significantly influence the player throughout the challenges. Health regeneration, strength or defense increases were all part of the bonus system. The tower rewarded those who demonstrated their talents and abilities along its path. However, Jinhyuk's knowledge of this system did not alarm the tower so much, so he asked it to open a subclass slot. However, the Necromancer had some doubts about the feasibility of this request, and he was right. It was impossible to do this, but only for one reason. At that moment he lacked 50 achievement points to achieve what he had already earned. Then the Necromancer decided to turn to his old acquaintance, who had been watching him and his trials all this time, Bala. One of the achievements was talking to one of the gods the first time this happened. Knowing this, Jinhyuk asked to reveal Baal's identity in order to earn an achievement point for this. Without a shadow of a doubt about the demon's help, the system revealed Baal's identity, and as expected, Jin-hyuk received an additional 200 points exactly as he needed. Jin-hyuk perceived any attention from Baal, the embodiment of all evil, as something very touching, as if Baal had a romantic interest in him. The Necromancer was rather disgusted by this. However, even such manifestations pleased Baal. Thus, after gaining enough points to change the system settings and unlock a new ability, Jin-hyuk decided to make his subclass master of all. Pleased with his resourcefulness, Jin-hyuk achieved the desired result, and he moved on, holding in his hands the staff that had become familiar to him. An interesting property of this weapon was the combination of physical strength and magic, allowing it to be used in various ways in battle, both as a melee and ranged weapon at the same time. Now Jin-hyuk could finally leave the selection and training room and move to the first level. The purple glow of his staff sent beams of light throughout the room. He took another step closer to his revenge, the staff bathed in lightning, increasing the impact of Jin-hyuk's internal energy with each passing second. With a powerful blow of his staff, he hit the floor, symbolizing the end of this stage. The shock waves concentrated at one point, shaking the space below him. It was time to move to a new location to continue the journey. In the distance, a dark blue sky illuminated by stars could be seen, giving the place a certain tranquility. The first level was the royal forest. Its main feature was the creatures that inhabited it and posed a danger to climbers. Soon Jin-hyuk will have to confront them. Resembling goblins, kobolds, despite their small size, were bloodthirsty creatures with sharp teeth, well-developed physical forms, and long elven-like ears. They wielded long knives and were quite skilled with them. The kobolds screamed loudly, making frightening sounds. In addition to their weapons, they had basic hand protection in the form of gloves, providing protection from minor blows, although most of their bodies were left unprotected. They tried to instill fear with their aggressive behavior, but in fact they did not pose a significant threat. A group of people encountered the kobolds, but did not dare to fight as one of their members was injured. Despite the presence of weapons, their fear outweighed their courage. One of the monsters, armed with a sword, rushed at the people, uttering incoherent words to instill even greater horror. It seemed that his piranha-like teeth could leave deep scars on the skin, and his eyes glowed with something demonic. It is worth noting that the kobold had numerous scars all over his body. One of the group members experienced mixed emotions. He was overcome with fear, but he also felt angry at himself for his inaction. He may have regretted starting the test for the sake of a supposed reward, blaming himself for putting himself in such a situation. He bared his teeth aggressively, and his face turned blue. Sweat stains were dripping from him, reflecting his state of mind. Bright lines of blue light appeared in the sky, resembling lightning. They merged into intricate patterns, like a spider's web, as if getting closer and closer together. Jin-hyuk jumped out of the portal and rushed towards the battle. From the viewpoint of the spectators, he seemed to be a deity seeking adventure in the human world, descended from his own realm for the sake of play. And just in time, Jin-hyuk witnessed a confrontation between humans and an attacking kobold, whose gang was hiding nearby. He decided to make them his first victims. With all his acquired strength, Jin-hyuk struck, and his speed was so great that his movements blurred before his eyes, and his smile expressed his overwhelming satisfaction. The force of his blows spread over several meters, crushing the kobold into pieces after finishing off. Jin-hyuk looked more and more like the powerful necromancer he once was, and it showed in his behavior. Finally, he was able to demonstrate his abilities. Standing in the middle of the battle, Jin-hyuk stepped on the fallen kobold, demonstrating his dominance over him. Both the people and the demonic creature's comrades were confused and shocked by Jin-hyuk's appearance. A purple glow, symbolizing death, permeated the scene, and smoke emanated from the kobold, as if it had been heated to a high temperature. Seeing this, the kobolds became even more angry and wanted to join the battle for their comrade. However, a hint of fear of a stronger opponent was still visible in their eyes. One of them wore a scarf-like garment on his body, torn due to frequent battles and unable to provide much protection. Jin-hyuk was looking forward to fighting the remaining kobolds, seeing them as part of his game, which brought him great pleasure. At times, Jin-hyuk resembled a man obsessed with power and a sense of superiority over others. This was the purpose of his life. The people behind Jinhyuk felt safe, as if behind a protective wall that could defeat any fearsome enemy. The man holding the injured sorceress found it completely incredible what he witnessed from Jinhyuk. He believed that Jinhyuk was most likely a member of the mage class based on his fighting style. However, he was puzzled by the use of powerful physical blows in battle rather than magic. Looking closely at the staff, one could see a sphere inside it that absorbed Jinhyuk's energy. The necromancer carried a staff on his back, the wooden base of which corresponded to the length of his height. Another member of the human group, who resembled an assassin in style, had already decided that Jinhyuk would be a good ally and offered to fight together. However, Jinhyuk was not interested at all. He only wanted to demonstrate his strength, and for the most part, the lives of others did not concern him. Jinhyuk's cold response greatly puzzled the group. One of them had long hair styled up, and the other had bangs that could hide part of their face, perhaps reflecting their personality or desire to hide from others. In fact, Jinhyuk wasn't as selfish as he seemed. His cold response was simply due to the awareness of the dangers that lie ahead for anyone, especially those who are well aware of what he himself has been through. The people were overcome with chills, and Jinhyuk's words greatly alarmed them, even more than the fear that filled them before. Following Jinhyuk's instructions, the people retreated even further. Rather than engage in combat, they decided to wait until one of their members could recover. However, it was not only this, but also their desire to see Jinhyuk handle the fight alone. Fear became a familiar feeling for those who faced Jinhyuk, but the new group of kobolds could not comprehend the strength of the enemy they faced. The realization of this was beyond their capabilities, and emotions overwhelmed them. The necromancer understood the emotions that overwhelmed them. It was a feeling of revenge for what they had lost. Jinhyuk found some irony in the fact that no matter the level of power, every being would eventually fight for revenge, even when the odds of winning were slim. His eyes were filled with magic and seemed to be hidden deep in the darkness. The bones on his neck became pronounced, resembling the creatures raised from the dead that he had previously summoned. The kobolds immediately rushed into battle, and one of them rushed straight at Jinhyuk. The kobolds had very sharp claws on their hands that could cause damage. However, what were the claws of Jinhyuk's power? Or even sharp swords? Can anything resist his power now? The attacking kobold was hit by Jinhyuk's staff and his forehead took the shape of a weapon. He lost all ability to fight Jinhyuk before he even started and was brutally killed by the necromancer's weapon, drawing blood. Jinhyuk taunted them with provocative remarks, maintaining his complacency and amassing new power in his headquarters. At times he resembled a real demon. Seeing Jinhyuk's bloodlust, the group of kobolds fled in fear, running as far away from him as possible to escape. Having waited so long for this moment of battle, Jinhyuk had no intention of letting anyone escape alive. His staff seemed to be powered not only by magical energy, but also by his own emotions. The necromancer's magic intensified, allowing him to store energy in his weapon, and he sent these concentrated blasts of energy towards the fleeing kobold. The poor creature had no chance of getting out alive from Jinhyuk's power. A magical arrow known as the Necromancer's beam pierced the enemy, incinerating his body as he howled in pain. Now all those who could pose a threat to the Necromancer lay lifeless, scattered across the battlefield, almost in one line. Jinhyuk's achievements and skills were extraordinary for a first level. The system that brought him to a new location could not keep up with his speed, and at this time Jinhyuk was already collecting bonuses in the form of mana from killed enemies. At each level, the player was given a task, the completion of which allowed him to move on to a new one and move to the location of the next floor. Having easily dealt with a group of kobolds, Jinhyuk could complete this task in a matter of minutes and continue searching for enemies who would match his strength in new locations and levels of this mysterious tower, all too familiar to the Necromancer. Thinking back on this, he remembered that the system offered an achievement called Assassin, which entailed killing thousands of the same type of enemies. In his past life, Jinhyuk achieved all these achievements while killing his enemies by the tens of thousands. To him, it was all like a game, where achievements were just another manifestation of his strength. Jinhyuk continued to stand over the kobold's body, contemplating the other side of himself. What else could please the devastated soul of a necromancer? The trait previously mentioned in his character profile, gluttony, had nothing to do with food. It had more to do with the thirst that manifested itself in battles with enemies.